No worries, Matt. Okay, let's get this started. So, a couple housekeeping items I want to address. Should take like 5 minutes. Want to get going. All right. So, some highlights from Circle. Love that everyone's already sharing their work. Please continue to do that. I'll talk a little bit about how the format would work going forward on Circle. But thank you, and also Aaron. I don't know if you're in the chat, but those are some really nice photos you uploaded. And Brittany, love to see the Kerrygold. My girlfriend would approve. She's Irish, so. And also another circle highlight, I think Jocelyn asked a really good question about avoiding onions burning your eyes. To date, this is the simplest, most like mess-free method I found, is just to take a string of plastic wrap and wrap it around your face. Maybe don't do it like I did here with the nose, because you're gonna suffocate yourself, but right above your nose is good. And I included a video of how I did this under Jocelyn's question. So a new channel alert. I realize a lot of people already are doing what I wanted you guys to do with Notion. So I created a channel basically for pre-recorded demos and like little clips I'll extract from like the main sessions to put in there so you guys can follow along. And I would love for you guys to show me your work like in the comments so we can collect everyone's work in one thread, similar to what people are already doing in the other channel. And so the other channel I've renamed from assignments to show and tell. Alice dropped a really good tweet the other day, which is she said that she's already taking pictures of her fridge and recently cooked meals to have a before pic. So I would love for you guys to have that record too. Please use this channel to share like meals you're cooking, things you're eating, things you're learning, tasks you're doing. And it's also for me to like, I'm gonna start sharing what I'm cooking along, so to fill in the gaps between sessions, so you guys can learn about how I think about food and meal prep and stuff like that. So definitely take advantage of that channel. And thank you for all the feedback so far. You guys have been great. And I just want to sort of iterate that it's not just lip service. I'm really taking your feedback to heart. So I'm implementing a bunch of changes from Sunday already. So some things from the changelog, we streamlined the demo cam switching. So thank you, Roberto, for helping me figure that out, how to stop the camera from being inverted. We're going to migrate to Circle because some of you are like, where can I check things? How am I supposed to use all these places? And I was also having trouble trying to run everything at once. So we're going to use Circle for now as the main, communication channel and also just community channel, just to make it easier. And at the end of class, I'm still going to put all the documentation in the Notion so you have all the resources available. But for now, let's just be on Circle, and their mobile app is pretty good for interaction. So I'm also already paying, I use their mobile app a lot to just check on comments and pay attention to what you guys are asking. We're gonna have a new chat moderator, Robert, who is a musician from LA. He's gonna help me basically field questions I may have missed. I missed a couple questions from Sunday, so he's there to make sure that things are relayed to me in a timely fashion. McKay pointed out that my hat was blocking the top-down shot, so I'm wearing it backwards. And I'm still trying to learn how to like remove my head from the top-down angle. So some patience here would be appreciated. And I'm wearing a hat because I want to avoid getting my hair. It's getting pretty long, so I don't want. And in general, you don't in food service, you don't want to have your hair tangled. So you usually wear a hat or a hairnet. Trying to be professional, not edgy here. And someone pointed out that I use build your intuition a lot in my explanation for things, and I apologize for that. I obviously still have the curse of knowledge as someone who's worked with food for a long time. So that's just a reminder for myself to like explain when I talk about intuition, because I know that for a lot of you who are just starting your cooking journey, that's not the case. And also in terms of pacing, I know it was really slow to start because we had to do some orientation stuff on Sunday. And from now, things are gonna go at a pretty solid pace. So you prepare for that. And without further ado, let's go to showtime. Is it okay for me to leave the music on while we do this? That passive vibe check. Okay, great. Thumbs up is good. Let's see. How do I exit this? Share. Switch over. Great. So we're gonna get our station ready. So take the next 5 to 6 minutes to make sure you have everything. What you really want on your stove right now is a pot, maybe 3 quarts of boiling water. So you want to start your water right now. Depending on what type of stove you have, it may take a long time for you to boil water. So we just want to get that started. If you want to have it boil faster, I usually put a lid on, but because I'm using induction, this thing boils in like 2 minutes, so it's not really necessary. Is there a question? I heard someone. Yes, we are also using the saucepan. So, depending how many servings you are, usually I use a 10-inch pan for like a serving of 2. We're working with 3 eggs and 3 tomatoes, but we're going to break down all your tomatoes today. And then we're going to put some of it away that we're not using. So 3 eggs, 3 tomatoes, serves about 2. If you're really hungry, probably just 1 person. We also have some chives here that I have out that we're going to use to garnish. And I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the cooking station here I have here. So next to your stove, you want to make sure you have like all the tools that you kind of, need. I have here in mason jar just some of the smaller tools that I have when I, am actively cooking. I have here a sort of cup container of kosher salt. And I also have a little cup container of sugar. I cook with sugar a lot, so I like to keep a small container just for cooking. Also kitchen towel, usually handy to have if you're grabbing a hot pan. So I like to keep that there if you don't have an apron on you. Your black peppercorn grinder and your 2 oils, which I talked a little bit about in the onboarding email, which you should have a high smoke point neutral oil. I have grapeseed here. And I have extra virgin olive oil. And we're only going to cook with the neutral oil today, so you only need the grapeseed or whatever neutral oil you have. So I'm going to put this back.
Hey, John.
Yes.
Can you briefly talk about what high smoke point means? McKay is asking.
Yes, I'll talk a little bit about it when we actually stir fry the eggs. But basically, high smoke point means anything above like 400 Fahrenheit, where the oil starts to smoke. And usually that is refined oils like sunflower oils, canola oil, vegetable oil. So you want something that's neutral tasting, because when you heat up oil to that temperature, they start to lose their aromatic volatile compounds. So if you're heating olive oil to past its smoke point, you're actually just burning off all the flavors. You're going to need another prep bowl. You can actually use your pint container for this to crack the eggs in. You're going to whisk the eggs in it. You're going to need a bigger bowl here for the ice bath. And we're going to cool our tomatoes down in it after we boil them. I'll talk a little bit about this bowl of rice here. This is completely optional today, but usually I want to show you a little bit about my process when I'm planning a meal. Usually it's kind of anchored by having a starch in the beginning. So usually when I start to cook, I'll put on a pot of rice or a pot of boiling water for boiling pasta or anything like that. I use a rice cooker because that just takes all the burden away from me to think about having to cook rice. If we have time at the end of class and you want to see me do stovetop rice, we can totally do that. But for now, just know that, I cook rice in the beginning just because that's what I eat most of my dishes with. For you, it might be pasta. So start to think about how to build in that, how to optimize for building that kind of starch in your meal. And I'm just gonna set it into the rice cooker and turn it on. So by the time we finish the main dish, I'll have rice to serve it with.
So John, would you like us to start boiling our water now?
Yeah, your water should be, coming up to a boil. It's what, like, and something that I encourage you to do is like take a mental note for how long your water boils. Because let's say you have 30 minutes for lunch and you have a kind of a crappy stove that takes 10 minutes to boil water. Well, that's a third of your, prep time, right? But also at the same time, if you have 10 minutes while the water boils, you can start to work on all your other mise en place. You don't necessarily have to wait and sort of sequence it. You can do stuff in parallel if you know how long certain tasks take in your kitchen. Let me get a check from the chat. Is everyone mostly set up? We're going to start. What you need at this moment is your paring knife. Before I use my knives, you should have your knives out, but I usually don't have the honing steel out just because, when I take my knives out, I'll just give them a couple strokes on each side on the honing steel, make sure they're aligned, and then I'll put them away. As you cook, you should always just keep putting stuff away because that just leaves a cleaner station. You want to stay organized, and it's just fewer dishes and tools to clean at the end of your meal. You will need the chef knife and the paring knife. So while the water comes to a boil, it doesn't have to be boiling yet. If it's not, don't worry about it. We're going to core the tomatoes. So you want to get a small container. This is where we're going to put all the trim. And you're going to take the paring knife and you're going to core the tomatoes. What we're doing here is we're learning how to peel a tomato. And the pot of boiling water is so we can blanch the skin itself. We're not actually cooking the tomato. We're just going to quickly blanch it. And blanching just means, putting some ingredient in hot boiling water, like a hard boiled water. Sometimes you do it with salt if you want to cook it. And it's a hefty amount of salt, but today we're just going to use blanching to peel the tomato. And you want to core it. So it should look something like this at the end. And you're also going to make an incision on the bottom with your paring knife. Make a little X. Don't puncture it too deeply. And you're just going to save the core thing in the container you have out. And you're just going to do this for every tomato you have. So you have 5 pounds of tomato. Just do them all. We're going to use all this today and on Thursday. And if you bought a lot of tomatoes and you don't use it on Thursday, you can always freeze it and make tomato sauce with it. I mean, you essentially have tomato sauce once you cook it down. So, and while we're doing this, if you have any questions around workflow or what we're doing today, please feel free to speak up. So a little bit about this egg tomato dish. It's a lot of you actually mentioned it as a comfort dish in one of your intro questions, and usually you can save a lot of time by not peeling the tomatoes, but this is a technique that I want to teach you guys because it teaches you about blanching. It teaches you about how long it takes for you to boil something, so you always have that frame of reference.
Jonathan, can you tell us again, why do we do the X on the bottom?
You do the X on the bottom to help the skin peel from itself.
Okay.
It just makes it easier for you to peel. You'll see what I mean. Usually on a ripe tomato, it becomes, it takes like 10 seconds for the tomato to start peeling. And also you can actually, if it's really ripe, you can actually just use your paring knife and kind of peel it on its own like that. But this takes a while, right? You want it to be a faster process, especially if you're processing like 3 pounds of tomatoes. So that's why we're using blanching to help us. And if you like pasta and you want to cook some pasta and serve this over pasta, you have a pot of boiling water already. So after you peel the tomatoes, you can use the pot of water to boil pasta. So you start to think of like, since I'm already started to think of in sequence of like how, if you do one task, how that task can carry over to another, ingredient. That's usually how I think about prep. It's like, if I turn on the oven, how many things can I cram in the oven for me to take advantage of, that particular cooking method, since I'm already spending the time to do that. Is everyone's pot of water boiling? Yay, nay? I'll get a quick check in the chat. Yes. Okay. All right. So right now you want to prep your ice bath. So what you want is to get roughly 1-to-1 ratio of ice in the water in your bigger bowl. So I'm just going to grab, let me switch. Yeah. So I have a bunch of ice here. Just going to grab this, and then you're going to put water in. Don't put too much water, otherwise the ice kind of melts a little too quickly, but you want to make sure that when you drop your tomatoes in, they can be completely submerged. And we're doing the ice bath because we actually don't want to cook the vegetables. We actually don't want to cook the tomato. We just want to peel it. We don't want to cook it. And an ice bath is also how you chill, anything that comes off the stove on the fridge that you don't want to keep continually cooking. Because what happens when you remove anything from, a heat source is that the heat actually the internal heat still actually cooks the food. So the way to stop that process is to, plunge into an ice bath to bring down the temperature. Okay, once you have the boiled water, I'll switch my camera. The water is not boiling for some reason, but it should be fine. Just drop your tomatoes in with your slotted spoon, or just a regular spoon. It's fine. So you want to lower it into the pot, and you want to put as many as possible in there. But obviously watch the water level so you're not making a mess. I'm going to scoop some water out so I can fit more in there. And you want to make sure your heat is cranked all the way up, because when you put the cold ingredient in a pot of boiling water, it's going to bring the temperature down. So you want to make sure it's at a continuous boil. And we're peeling the tomatoes because, it gives you a smoother texture in the final dish. So you're not kind of chewing on the skin itself. But honestly, this dish also tastes just perfectly fine without you having to peel it. And the riper your tomatoes, the easier the skin's going to come out. So it's also a good litmus test for if your tomatoes are ripe. And they should really not spend more than like a minute in the water. I think my tomatoes might be on the less ripe side. And once you see some peeling going on, then you're ready to put them in the ice bath. How's everyone's tomatoes looking? Yeah, if it's slightly peeling, like you can totally take them out.
You said 1 minute, right? My water just started boiling.
Yes. Starting to split, that's perfect. That's what you want to see. Unfortunately, my tomatoes are on the, yeah, not super ripe. So you might have to just manually hack it and peel it. Yep, this one is done. Yep, so let me show you what it should look like. You can start to see it kind of peeling off a little bit. That's totally fine. The rest is going to come off once you put it in the ice bath, and then just kind of use your fingers to peel it off.
Hey, John.
Yeah,
Melissa has a question. What if we don't have enough ice for the ice bath?
you can put regular water is fine, honestly, but you want to change the water out. So maybe just run it under running water. And you can instantly see like the tomatoes kind of melting the ice, because you're actually transferring a lot of heat from the tomatoes to the ice bath, and then the ice itself is coming to temperature. So right now I'm going to switch my camera. You can see, once you put in the ice bath to stop it from cooking, you can see that it kind of just peels, right? So you just want to peel it. And imagine trying to do this with, a knife before this stage. It's going to be a nightmare. And you're actually going to save all this tomato skin as trim. So put it in the same container you put the cord stems in. And then you're going to work in batches. So if you have more tomatoes that couldn't fit in the pot, you're just going to bring the water to a boil again. Let's just peel all the tomatoes while we have. And that's kind of a philosophy that I'm going to keep preaching throughout the course, is like, you want to cook once and eat thrice, right? So by peeling 2 pounds of tomatoes, now you have 2 pounds of tomatoes to work with. Obviously, you're not going to use all of it today, but you're going to put it away, and then that saves you time in your next meal. Okay, so let's peel this whole thing. And if you can start to see kind of like how it affects the texture if you cook it for a little while. Obviously, you sacrifice some of the texture on the outside. You kind of cook the outside a little bit, but it just helps you get the skin off. So it doesn't really matter. We're going to cook down the tomatoes anyway. Thanks for joining us, Emma. I hope you get to make this soon. And I love this dish because while it is a more Chinese, while people who are more familiar with or tend to be Chinese, like the ingredients themselves are not fussy, right? Like everyone has access to tomatoes, eggs are everywhere, and it takes just salt and sugar to season it, and it tastes fantastic. And depending on your preference, you can also make it however you want, right? If you like your tomatoes a little bit bitey, you can dice them in bigger chunks. And if you like your, depending on how you like your eggs, you can either make big curds, which we're going to make today on the stainless steel skillet, or if you want a soft scramble, you can also do that in a nonstick pan. So how's everyone doing? Tomatoes ready? Right? Yeah. Isn't it cool? It just comes right off. So now you know how to make peeled tomatoes that they sell in a can. And that's another hack. If you don't really, if you want to keep, if you want to make this, as a last resort dish because you don't know what else to make, keep canned peeled tomatoes. Marzano sells really good ones, and you can make this dish with that too. I think it's called Marzano. Yeah, so now your tomatoes are cooled. I'm just gonna check on my other tomatoes in the bath. Yeah, they're ready. Okay.
This is dope.
The difference between this and canned tomatoes, there's really no difference. I mean, canned tomatoes obviously more processed, but this is how they would make it in huge, batches. I would say canned tomatoes usually has a little bit more preservatives, but canned tomatoes are better than if you get tomatoes out of season. So because they usually produce it and seal it and preserve it at their ripest point. So if you have very unripe, if you go to the grocery store and the tomatoes are really hard and you eat it and it's not, tasty, then I would offer canned tomatoes. All right, so we're gonna get ready for a lot of dicing. We're gonna learn how to dice a tomato. Good luck on your meeting, Matt. Thanks for joining us. Yep, so get that ready. Make sure your hands are clean. All right, so when you're dicing tomatoes, there's going to be a lot of juice. So what happens is that you want to get a couple quarts, or just actually, you can just use a prep container. Use a prep bowl. We're going to use a prep bowl for this one. You're going to dice the tomatoes by first taking your chef's knife, and you're just going to, can you see? Or should I zoom in on this camera? Yeah. Yeah. So you're going to dice along the equator of the tomato to expose like the inside, right? And to prevent all the juice from going all over your cutting board, you want to just kind of squeeze out the seeds and the juice. And we're going to use some of that. But this is just so you can work a little bit more cleanly and you don't have to like scoop up all the juice from your cutting board. And then you're going to do that. You want to start, when you're doing a big prep item like this, you want to start thinking about sort of the assembly line methods, which is you focus on one task and you do that one task for the entire batch, and then you move on to the next one. So we're just going to do that for, take the next 4 minutes to do that. Squeeze out all the juice and the seeds.
Hey, John, are some seeds okay? Or
Yeah, some seeds are okay. You just want to get the liquid out, right? Mostly just because, if you're dicing like 10 tomatoes and you don't do this step, you're going to get your cutting board extremely waterlogged. We're also going to cook this down in the final dish anyway, so. So a little bit about the recipe. Usually I like to cook the ingredients separately so we can control kind of like the texture of each component. So we'll start with the egg, and then we'll kind of leave the egg aside, put the egg aside, cook the tomatoes down, and then re-add the eggs. Because you want the eggs to form their own curds. If you cook them at the same time, what happens is that the eggs start to get dispersed and you get kind of a grainy egg in the final dish, which it might be your preference. So you could totally do it like that, but right, we're gonna work a little faster. And dicing the tomatoes is, relatively straightforward. It's not as involved as the onion. Let me just put this away. And that at every point of your prep process, you want to be cognizant of how your station looks. You want to make sure that it's organized. And make sure you have the proper containers to put this in. So I'm going to use a to-go container to put all this diced tomatoes in. So we'll have that ready. And then put away the ice bath, rinse it off, put it in the dish rack or on the drying rack. That's one fewer dish you have to wash it at the end. So can we get a gut check? Is everyone ready to dice their tomatoes? Yeah? No? Yes? Yes. All right. Dicing tomatoes is easy. We're just going to cut it into strips, right? And then you're going to basically dice it into squares. That's it. Simple. I'm going to keep doing this. If you're not ready, I'm just going to keep doing this for the next like 2 minutes. You'll see what I'm doing. And what helps is that if you kind of want to squash it a little bit to make it flat, and that's kind of a knife technique that you always want to remember, is like the flatter you can make the thing, the more even your dice and the more easy it is, because you don't have to raise your knife as tall. And it will reduce the chances of you nicking yourself if you have kind of a shallow knife. Is the music still on or is it off?
It's been off for a little bit.
Oh, darn it. Okay, well, I was going to comment that the music is really nice this time, but I forgot to share the audio, which I figured out what to do. The audio. Okay, what about now?
Perfect.
Oh, all right. See, Robert, this is the kind of stuff that you're supposed to remind me as my live producer.
I shall endeavor to do better in the future.
Yeah. And this is the part where you can customize how you want your eggs, your stir fry dish. So if you want, more of a bite to your tomatoes, obviously just leave the strips. You can just kind of cook down the strips itself and it'll retain more of that tomato. But I like mine a little bit smoother, so I just use a dice. Plus, then you don't have to think about how much tomato to dice and how much to kind of keep in strips. And obviously, because today we have an hour, so we're just gonna, do a lot of prep. Obviously, if you don't have a lot of time, you would just, do however much you are going to eat for lunch that day. But I always think about how I'm going to help out myself in the future. So even the rice I'm cooking, I usually double the serving size. So I make twice of what I'm going to eat because that rice is going to be good for like the next 3 to 4 days, and you can make a ton of other stuff with it. You want to cook once and eat 3 times, but not eat the same thing. So the way to do that is to get all your components separate, but make enough so that it lasts. Okay. And then you're just going to put it away. And this is the part where your kind of squeegee helps a little bit. I'll zoom out to help you see what I'm doing. But I like to keep the cutting board at the very edge of my prep surface, because that means I can just scoop things down without hitting the prep area. So I can just lean my board under and scoop everything down below. Okay, this is going to be, we're going to need another container. So thanks for joining us, Lisa. And then the bench scraper also acts as a squeegee, so you can get all the juice left on the cutting board. So after you're done with the dice, take a moment to clean up your cutting board. Take a drink of water. Remember to hydrate. Clean your knives, put away stuff you don't need anymore. So, you know, the tomato trim, put a label on it, throw it in the freezer. You know, this is also good for stock. How are we doing? Is everyone done? Are we ready to cook the eggs? Nice. Awesome. I need to move a little faster. So let's crack some eggs. So take your 3 eggs, or however many you want to eat for lunch. Start cracking it. Key to cracking eggs without getting shells in it is to be decisive. You want a hard crack, and you want to do it on a flat surface. If you do it on the edge of something, you might push some of the cracked shells in. And then when you get really good at it, you can do it with one hand, which I will, if you're interested in seeing how that happens, I'll do a pre-recorded video later. And take your tiny whisk, or any kind of whisk you have, and then just whisk it. The eggs. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's actually really hard to get all the whites incorporated. At a restaurant, we use an immersion blender to like really emulsify this. Basically mix it in really well. But it doesn't have to be perfect. Like if you see a couple strands, it's fine. You're doing scrambled eggs, not, you know, an egg sauce. This is the important part, so you know, pay attention. You want to make sure you season your eggs right now, because what happens when you season after is that you get kind of unevenly distributed bites of like seasoned egg. And if you've never seasoned your egg, season your egg today and taste it. It tastes completely different. Seasoning just means that we're going to incorporate enough salt to where the ingredient really tastes like itself. And I would say like this is really the fundamental difference between like restaurant food and maybe some of the food that you've cooked that you find a little bland. It really boils down to seasoning. So with an egg, you can't really taste as you season. So I would just do, keep making scrambled eggs and like adjust how much, salt you put in it. But the reason why we use kosher salt is because it's called kosher salt because it is the type of texture and size that draws out the most moisture from meat to make it kosher. It's kosher. Not that it has any like other Jewish connotation. So you get really even grains, and then when you season something, you can distribute it in the same amount over a large surface area. So you just want to add a solid pinch. For 3 eggs, I like to get a good pinch in there. If you're doing less, obviously like adjust the pinch size. And you're just gonna whisk it. Where'd my whisk go? Oh, right here. Yeah. Okay, so now another important piece is you're gonna preheat your pan.
All right, John, while you're doing that, Tiffany has a question.
Yes.
Do you recommend us to always keep salt in a container?
Yeah, you can get a nice salt well, but because I use salt itself as a preservative, so I'm not afraid that this is going to get bacteria in it. Like nothing's going to grow in here. A container like this is part of the quart potato container set that I recommend that you guys buy. It's just nice to have this out. You can obviously go fancier and get a salt cellar with like a little lid if you want. Okay, we're gonna preheat our pan. So a little bit about stainless steel pans. You always want to make sure the pan is hot before you add anything in it, which is the opposite of what a nonstick does, right? Because with nonstick, if you heat it up too high and forget about it on the stove, it's going to create like these toxic Teflon fumes, which you don't want. But with stainless steel, it's safe. It can withstand like 1,000 degrees just fine. So you're going to heat up your pan. I usually crank it up to high just because like I don't want to wait around for the pan to heat up. So the higher heat you go in the beginning, the more that you want to get it preheated. And the reason why you preheat it is because, let me switch my camera. The reason why you preheat it is because the surface of the stainless steel is actually porous. So as you heat it up, it actually contracts and makes the pores smaller. And the reason why things stick to a stainless steel pan is because 99% of the times because you didn't preheat it right. But how do we know when a preheated pan is ready? The reason why we use a high smoke point neutral oil is because the smoke point tells us the temperature at which the oil becomes smoke, right? So if you start to see smoke coming out of your pan, you know that's the smoke point. So for grapeseed oil, the smoke point is 420 degrees. So when it starts smoking, you know it's 420. So when you do a stir fry, you want to keep the temperature above like 350, I would say. So once it starts to get a little wisp of smoke, you want to take down the heat because you know it's ready at 400 degrees or something before it really starts smoking. And you want to observe how the oil behaves in the pan. If it starts to get like wispy, you'll see like little swirls. It means that it's almost ready. I don't like to do the water test just because when you put water on oil, it kind of splatters everywhere. So right now, you can kind of feel the heat. If you can feel heat coming from your pan, you want to put the oil in. And then the oil becomes very viscous. You want to wait for that whisk of smoke. And you don't need to put a lot of oil, just put a thin layer down. You're stir frying, you're not like shallow pan frying. So a little bit of oil is fine. You want to swirl it around, make sure you get an even layer so your eggs don't stick. And hopefully this kind of shows you that you can totally cook eggs in a stainless steel pan. It's a little bit more work maybe, but it's not nonstick, and nonstick is very environmentally destructive, and I want to be cognizant of that. So you can start, if you bend down, you'll start to see a wisp of smoke. I'm getting that wisp right now, and then you can see where my pan is. It's starting to get really wispy, really viscous, really loose, not viscous. And then that's when you know you're ready. So what you want to do is keep the temperature at a medium level so it doesn't burn. But when you cook, when you put anything in the pan, remember what I told you, which is you're going to bring the temperature down. So once it's Once your pan is probably preheated, you're gonna pour in the egg. And this happens in 30 seconds, so like just be ready. You're gonna dump the egg back into the container that you put the scramble in. And then you're just gonna whisk and curd. So maybe pay attention to this part. You're gonna hear that sizzling sound, which means that you have correctly preheated your pan. You're just gonna move this around the pan. And you're gonna get these large curds. And if you've done it right, you'll see that it's not sticking to the bottom. You have just unlocked the secret to using stainless steel. And once you get most of the curds formed, you want to turn the heat off because it's just going to keep cooking itself. So you can see that I'm turning off the heat already. The eggs are really just going to cook themselves at this point. And then, you get this giant kind of curd that you're going to break up later. But basically, at this point, you're going to put it back in your bread bowl. You put the scrambled eggs in. That's it. Usually this takes like a minute once your pan is heated up. And you can see, my pan, there's really no sticking here. You do a wipe and it's clean. So at this point, I would also, out of habit, I would just wash this. It doesn't really take much. And that's one less pan you have to clean at the end of your meal.
Jonathan, how do we know when it's done?
When you get like curds like this, and then it's like slightly loose on the top, you don't want to completely cook it because you're going to combine it with the tomato later. How are we doing? Is it okay to wash if the pan is hot? Yes. You don't want to dunk it in water, but it's totally fine if you just put some lukewarm water on it and wash it. Actually, the key to washing pans is like using hot water. Hot water removes a lot of the gunk. If you get anything stuck on the bottom of your pan, usually you would just boil water and that gunk, and then you can scrape it versus letting it soak, which is not a really effective way of cleaning pans, especially stainless steel. Actually, my mistake. You're actually going to use the same pan, so don't wash it. You don't need to wash it. If you wash it, sorry about that. So you're going to put it on medium heat, and because we're not stir frying, we're kind of just trying to break down. We're going to do what I call you're going to simmer down the tomatoes. You're going to take however much tomatoes you think you want to eat. You just want to put it in the pan itself. It might sizzle a little bit, which is fine because you have water in the pan. And then you're just going to kind of cook down the tomatoes. You're going to add back the tomato juice. So tomato juice here that we saved, you're just going to add a little bit to cover the tomatoes. And what that does is helps kind of cook the tomatoes in their own juice.
Sorry, do we need to add oil again? I missed that.
Sorry, can you repeat that question? Oh, you don't add oil. You don't need oil. You don't need to add oil. Because we're not stir frying, we're actually just reducing the tomatoes to create like the sauce, right? We're cooking the tomatoes and also reducing the tomatoes in their own juice in order to create the sauce that the eggs then go in. I'll go over this concept on Sunday when we talk a little bit about cooking like science, but basically you need the oil to kind of absorb the heat from the pan so you're not scorching and burning your eggs, right? But with anything that's water-based, it's totally fine to just cook it because water boils at 212 or 100 Celsius. So as long as you have any water in the pan, that pan is not going to get hotter than 100 degrees Celsius or 212 Fahrenheit.
Alice has one more question. Do we need to salt the tomatoes?
Oh yes, excellent, amazing question. You're gonna season the tomatoes too. So this is the part where you're gonna taste as you go, which is you're gonna put a little bit of salt in there. And then you're going to also put a little bit of, this is where you can season to taste if you like. But basically, if your tomatoes are super ripe and they're really juicy and sweet, you might omit the sugar in this part. But if it's a little acid, you want to bring a sweet note to it. Usually I add kind of a pinch of sugar as I go. And you just want to keep an eye on it. Because as the tomatoes reduce, you're going to get concentrated flavors, right? So if you put too much salt in the beginning, that saltiness is also just going to be more pronounced at the end. And you want a kind of a gentle simmer. You don't want to boil the tomatoes too hard. Basically, you're just kind of waiting for this tomato sauce to kind of reduce on its own. But for the interest of time, I'm going to speed this up by kind of hard boiling it. So you can see the final dish. And while that's doing its thing, you know, obviously clean up your station, make sure it's clean, put stuff away, label things. You should never just be standing around in the kitchen. There's always something to do. So save these diced tomatoes. You can pour the sauce back in. You can put not the sauce, the tomato juice back in. We're gonna use this to make shakshuka on Thursday.
Hey, John. We were adding salt and sugar, or just sugar?
You want to add a pinch of salt, right? You want to start with a baseline level of seasoning, and then you're gonna add sugar to taste. So you're gonna add enough sugar where it tastes kind of sweet. You know, I mean, this is really up to, this is kind of your choose your own adventure. Like a standard stir fry tomato egg dish might have a lot of sugar if you're in like parts of Taiwan that really like their sugary foods. It's going to be a little bit more savory if you go to other parts of China. There's really no one way to make it. Usually when I can taste sweetness from the tomatoes in addition to the acidity, that's where I stop. So we have, while that's doing its thing, I'm going to work on the chives. So you don't want the tomatoes to like reduce down too much. You kind of want to see kind of a saucy texture. And it also depends on how saucy you want your final dish to be. I prefer a little bit more liquid in there. So it's almost done. I would let it go for another minute or so. And then the only step after that is to fold in the eggs and then also do a little garnish. I'm sorry we kind of ran out of time today, but I'll post this in Simon Says channel later. But basically, you're going to like to garnish with the little chives at the end. And this is also a good way to test your knife skills and also your sharpness. So what you want to do is you want to bunch this up, and then you want to align all the ends here. And then you're going to do a fine dice. This is textbook French garnish. But one thing I didn't mention how to do last time is like you want to make sure that your guiding hand is in claw formation. So it always, the edge of your knife always brushes against like your middle finger, basically. Or you can use your, you know, whatever finger you feel most comfortable sticking out. But basically, your knuckle should always be in front. So then you can just do that and then use your guiding hand to move the knife. You want to keep as fine a dice as possible because chives are super small, so you don't have to worry about the fine dice being a little bit off shape. Ideally, you'll get kind of this fine texture. Used to have to do this, like dice a quart of this every morning. for prep. And it's really satisfying because you can only really dice chives if you have a sharp knife. And I'll upload a knife sharpening video for those of you who got the sharpening stone later. So you can do a before and after. I want you to cut the chives with your current knife and see how it feels, and then sharpen your knife later and experience nirvana of a sharp knife. I will switch back to the tomatoes now. Now it's this is kind of consistency you want, kind of a saucy consistency, but it's not loose, right? So you can start to see the tomatoes in there, kind of like a stew. And usually a good way to test this is to draw like a channel in the sauce with your spoon, and if it kind of creates a channel and it's not just instantly coming back, then your sauce is ready. And at this stage, you want to turn off your stove and taste, right? So take any spoon you have and just taste it. Tweak it right now because your egg's already seasoned, so you don't want to season it with the egg. So mine's a little sweet right now because it reduced down, so I'm just going to add some salt to counteract that. But the ideal kind of flavor profile should be like sweet and sour and tart, and also savory. And now you're just gonna take your spoon and kind of fold the eggs in, and then just kind of break them up and put it on low heat just to warm up the eggs. If it's a little, you can see it kind of seize up, a little bit loose. You can add a little water, that's fine. But this is kind of the consistency I like. It's not too loose, also not too thick. Actually add a splash of water here. Just a little bit. There you go. So now we have that ready. We are going to go back to our garnish. And when I'm doing garnish, I would just, you just want to chop a bunch, even if you're not going to use all of it. This is just free garnish for, the rest of the week.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Tiffany's asking, I think you did this, but should we pour a good amount of the sauce back into the container before this step?
The sauce back into the container, what? You do is pour a good amount of sauce back into the container. Not the sauce, the tomato juice. Yes, the tomato juice that you kind of squeezed out, you want to put it back into, you can just put it back. You can keep it separate if you want, but just to save space in your fridge, you want to put it back. Because we'll use that juice for the shakshuka. Then label your chives. At this stage, you have your tomatoes ready, you have your garnish labeled and ready. Something I like to do is just make sure that your prep surface is now your plating surface. I know a lot of you have small kitchens, so you can use your cutting board to double as a plating area, but you just want to make sure it's clean. Put the rest of your chives back. So the rice that I put on at the beginning of class should be ready. And honestly, when I'm usually in a rush, I'm making this in like 10 minutes. I don't usually peel the tomatoes. I just kind of put on the eggs, and then all the tomatoes go in. And I serve it straight out of the pan because, that's one less dish to wash. But I'll show you how I would kind of plate this. So get your plate. One thing about hot food, and this is something that I will kind of emphasize throughout the course, is like, if you want your food to stay hot, the serving vessel should be hot too. So hot food, hot plate, cold food, cold plate. And it makes a huge difference once you start doing it. If you're using the oven, usually I put it in the oven, after it gets turned off for like 2 minutes, and it'll be sufficiently hot. But one trick I found is that if you have a microwave, you just put it in for 30 seconds, it'll be a hot plate. I'm just putting this in the microwave behind me. And then we have the rice here. Usually I would put it in some kind of a like bowl to shape it. And if you want a quick and dirty recipe for rice, I usually weigh out my rice just because I make it in pretty big batches. But the water to rice ratio after you wash the rice is 1 to 1.5. So for 200 grams of rice, I usually, this is for short grain rice that you're kind of steaming. And then I'll put it like this. Our plate is done. Grab the plate from the microwave. Could actually go for a minute. It's not like too hot. You want the plate to be like almost hot to the touch, like almost too hot to hold, because it's gonna start coming down in temperature as soon as you leave it. So take a serving spoon. I'll kind of invert it. This is how I usually plate my rice dishes. And then you want to take your pan with the eggs in it, and then just kind of spoon it over. This isn't perfect, but yeah, so for a presentation like this, you want the sauce to be a little saucier. But I made this a lot when I lived by myself. The ingredients, no fuss. And then you would kind of garnish with chives for color. And also use any kind of herbs, leafy herbs you want. And that's a pretty balanced lunch. You got eggs, you got carbs, you got vegetables, you got protein. Cool. I know we went over time. I'm glad I kept it over, a little over 5 minutes, but thank you for joining us, Tiffany. Now, if you guys want to hang out and answer any questions while I eat this, I'm happy to do that. But that's it for today's session. I hope I'll have this uploaded to Circle in the next couple hours. Hopefully you learned a lot. We went through over a lot of techniques today, peeling, blanching, simmering, stir frying. Yeah. Hopefully this is, my goal is like these sessions, you should be able to make a meal out of this, right? So now you have your lunch or your dinner or something. Cool. Yes, metal you can no metal on metal is totally fine as long as you're not taking a knife to your skillet. The great thing about stainless steel pans is that they are self-healing. So as soon as you see a scratch, it doesn't affect performance. You actually get the metal material actually creates a different layer based on the chemistry. So with stainless steel, metal on metal is totally fine. Metal on enameled cast iron is also fine. The one thing you don't want is metal on nonstick, right? Because you're going to scrape off the coating and then you're going to have to buy a new pan. Plus, it's bad for the earth. So let me switch to a space view so you can see my. Yeah. Hopefully, you learned a lot. I'm here to. Any questions? Heating this later doesn't make so much difference for taste if you heat on the stove or microwave. So when you heat anything, you want to make sure you're not cooking it twice, right? So actually, I would say microwave is probably the best course of action. Like you just take one of these containers. If you can't eat this, put it in here. Add a couple drops of water just because like as it cools, it kind of like congeals and the tomatoes suck up the water. So put a couple, a dash of water to give the microwave something to heat, and then put it with microwave. I have a whole set of tips I'll go over, but you want to microwave on low for like 5 minutes, just because it gives you a more even heating. You're not going to get that hot pocket effect. But I wouldn't do this on the stove, because what a stove does is like, unless you're spreading it on an even layer, the heat doesn't heat everything evenly. So you're gonna have like overcooked eggs mixed with cooked eggs, and it's just not fun to eat. My plates are these are my girlfriends. They are from Heath, actually. So if you're in San Francisco, they're based in, I think you can get them in the Mission or something, but yeah. Is it okay to wash your cast iron with soap? Yes, as long as you've built up enough seasoning with it. With cast iron, I'm a little wary about cooking anything acidic with cast iron, just because the metal can leach into the food. So another plus for stainless steel. Obviously, you can only, that happens when you cook, with cast iron over hours. So maybe don't make a tomato sauce with cast iron, but for this, it's totally fine. Cool. Well, if there's nothing else, I'll let you guys go. I'll post a whole bunch on Circle. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and bon appetit.